Ted Gunderson was an FBI agent from 1951 to 1979 when he retired, and he contributed heavily to the moral panic of satanic ritual abuse and what we know as the Satanic Panic today. He was on Geraldo many times and other daytime talk show hosts, and always they put him forward as this voice of authority because he had the credibility of having been in the FBI. And for many years, there seemed to be no conspiracy theory he didn't solidly believe in and advocate for, but it never seemed to diminish his credibility. He was always coming on the shows, on the scene, in the media, as strictly a man who was special agent in charge for many years in the FBI, and that gave him the weight of authority to speak on issues from 9/11 truth. He said also the 93 World Trade Center bombing was an inside job, the Oklahoma City bombing, Pearl Harbor, of course, and he was an advocate for the chemtrail theory, which is one of the dumber conspiracy theories you'll ever come across, that the contrails from jet airliners are full of toxins and poisons meant to either kill us or render us stupid or in whatever way contribute to the advancing of the New World Order. During the Obama administration, he claimed that there were thousands of death camps being set up and some certain quantity of guillotines were collected along with caskets, and he knew their locations in Georgia and Montana. He always had this kind of information that he was just about to release, and he was always saying that it was supported by his various contacts within the intelligence community and by his criminological research, being an expert, having spent so many years within the FBI. But of course, they never manifested. He caused an uproar in 1989 when he was on the Geraldo show and said that in Mason County, Washington, there was a mass burial site where they can't possibly go there and dig them all out, he said, because there's just too many of them. It was a satanic burial ground. He was claiming that the police weren't following up on this, and he was trying to get this information out there, whereas, as a matter of fact, the police actually began looking for him after he was making these claims on live TV because they wanted to know what he was talking about. They wanted to know if there was any credibility to his claims. And after a while, Gunderson made comment about this, and he said he wouldn't turn it over. He quote, "If I turn this over to the wrong law enforcement officials, I could blow the whole thing," he told a reporter. "This element has infiltrated every level of society. It's big, it involves heavy-duty intelligent people, doctors, lawyers, prosecutors, police, airline pilots. Every walk of life has been infiltrated." What's interesting is you think he's just a paranoid rather than a con man, but you see elements of being a con man as well. In fact, at one of these points when he was on the run away from law enforcement looking to speak to him, or claiming that he was laying low because the FBI was going to murder him for knowing too much about their ties to Satanism, it turned out he was actually on the run from the FBI, it seemed, because they were looking to question him about a fraudulent loan system he had set up where people would give him front money, and he was supposed to give them back. It was called Decla International. He was never brought up on charges for that, but they did want to question him, and it seems like in that time frame he was really avoiding them for that. Here's a kind of introductory video that gives you kind of a flavor of the kind of appearances Ted Gunderson made, the kinds of claims he would make as well.
In my opinion, I can't prove it, these are mind-controlled victims, MK Ultra mind-controlled victims, and the whole thing is designed to destroy the Second Amendment, to take our guns away from us.
And I said to myself, what's this all about? I don't know anything about Satanism. I read about it in the Bible, of course, and that's about it.
The sacrificial ritual, a deep incision beginning at the sternum area of the chest, is made with a long blade sacrificial dagger.
Of course, this was obviously a satanic ceremony. The most important thing is that we have a mission to save our own souls and save the souls of all of us around us. So,
establishes there is a conspiracy and infiltration into the lower levels of the government all the way to the White House.
Other parts of the victims are worn as worn as charms, or saved to be used in spell casting.
And the final goal was to take over the world, the one world government.
Where the immortal who serves the head of another immortal gathers and takes in that immortal's life force, energizing him. Much like in the series of The Highlander.
So checking into the Jack Kennedy assassination, I learned, no question about it, that it was a joint hit by the CIA and the Chicago mobs. This evil element has infiltrated virtually every level of society.
I finally figured out when my blood pressure, they would give me some kind of a gas that raised my blood pressure, and I tell this publicly because they're probably going to do it to a lot of us.
And I say that there's close to 4 million, if not 4 million, practicing Satanists in America today. That's 1.5% of the population.
The cut is then brought downward to the belly button, and a vertical incision is made across the abdomen, intersecting the first cut, forming an upside-down cross.
Because I met with Osama bin Laden in the spring of 1986. By the way, this dovetails, the satanic cult movement dovetails into, as part of the Illuminati, dovetails into drugs, prostitution, homosexuality, the whole 9 yards.
Turn your old car in for cash, okay? Because they don't have the computer in the old cars. They want everybody to buy a new car so that they keep track of us.
McVeigh was mind control. No question about it. The children are disappearing in this country at the rate of 83 per hour. That's over 700,000 children a year. The World Trade Center 93, and that 911 is actually a ploy in order to take away many of our constitutional rights and civil liberties.
In some cases, some of the internal organs and parts of the victim's body are consumed by the group, as it is believed that immersed sexual powers, strength, and psychic powers can be ordained through this process.
It's been planned 2 centuries.
In the desert in Area 51. But the bottom line is another step toward taking over the United States and taking over the world. The Illuminati plan, the golden plan.
Well, we're talking about a police state.
There's thousands of Americans out there. By the way, I've been shot with a laser beam twice. There's been attempts to gas me.
I have been told by a source that's reliable, a source that's involved in the intelligence community, that there is extensive city underground in the Las Vegas, Nevada area.
It is a conspiracy. This was obviously a satanic ceremony.
Yeah. We all need to leave the country to save our lives. We're getting ready for martial law. Everything's pointing to martial law.
That is iced tea from last night. That's what I spilled in my lecture. Okay.
Chanting, candles, coming out with a movie. People think it's fiction, it's not true, and yet 5, 10, 8, 15 years later, whatever it might be, it comes to pass. And so it makes me think, hey, do you think people in Hollywood know what's going on ahead of time? Well, I think we do, most of us here. He was mind control, no question about it, in my opinion. I can't prove what he was.
A former son of darkness, now a child of the true light, Jesus Christ.
This is all on the internet, by the way.
So he had about 30 years after he quit the FBI and went into private practice to disclose the information he claimed he had. He kept claiming he had some 300 boxes of information and that they were trying to kill him. This Illuminati ploy, they were putting poison into his air ducts at his home. They were infiltrating his car. They were sneaking in at night, but they would never come outright and kill him until he died of cancer at the age of 83. 30 years later, and you'll still see people on the internet saying they finally caught up with Ted. They took him out. But his credibility never seemed to diminish no matter what he did. He also claimed that the government was suppressing a cure to Down syndrome that he knew about and had tested himself. But he wasn't on Anderson Cooper one time. Anderson Cooper was talking about Sylvia Browne, this discredited psychic.
James, you've actually called Sylvia Browne a villain. We spoke to Ted Gunderson, who's a retired senior special agent in charge of the FBI in Los Angeles. He's worked with Sylvia, and he says he's worked with her quite a bit, and he says this about her. He says, quote, "I've worked with numerous psychics in the past, and very few are really on target, but Sylvia Browne is probably one of the most accurate psychics in the country." Now, that's from a former senior FBI official. Are you saying he's wrong?
Could he possibly be wrong? I first became aware of Ted Gunderson, I think it was about 2004, and I was researching this old defunct cult from the 60s known as the Process Church of the Final Judgment. And I had been talking to some of the people who were part of the process, and I read a book by a man named Maury Terry that tried tying the process to the Son of Sam murders, saying that these were ritualistic murders at the behest of the process and done in the name of Satan, of course. And the evidence provided in this book wasn't very good at all, despite the fact that Maury Terry was supposed to be a journalist. He didn't quite tie it all together, and it didn't much make sense in the least, and it was terribly unconvincing. But I saw that in the credits of the book, he thanked Ted Gunderson, the great FBI agent who helped him out. And I thought it seemed very bizarre that somebody with that kind of credibility would have helped on such a shitty book. So I looked up Ted Gunderson, and I don't remember how I found his number. I guess it was just online, where he wrote affidavits all the time and had his number on them. But I just called him up, and I asked him what he thought, where was the real evidence that the process was involved in the Son of Sam murders? Was there more to it than what was in the book? And he said he had gone, I think, with the author or with some other investigator to one of the crime scenes, or to one of the rooms of one of the people who was a perpetrator, some significant location in the case, in any case, and that there was a Bible open to some passage in Isaiah, and it had a typical kind of depraved biblical quote in there about bloodletting or whatever else. And he cited the quote, and I said, "But Ted, it's the Bible, it's the Holy Bible." And he said, "But that's what these Satanists do. They leave little clues like that everywhere." So I guess if you're looking for the clues, you'll find it wherever you go. And I also asked him what he thought about the process. Several of the luminaries from the process went off to open the largest no-kill animal shelter in the world, and they were stridently anti-vivisection and pro-animal rights. And he said in regards to them opening the animal shelter that this is because they need the animals to commit their ritual sacrifices. And I asked him what direct evidence he had of that. And he was a little frustrated and said, "But that's what they do. That's what Satanists do." And Ted just knew it, and that was the evidence he needed. Of course, there was all kinds of evidence in these boxes that never came forward, in all kinds of credible sources that needed to remain anonymous. So by the time Ted Gunderson died, I was suspicious that perhaps he wasn't actually in the FBI at all, or maybe he was in the FBI, but he was just a clerk, and he was kind of riding that wave of credibility ever since and never really did anything with them. So when he died in 2011, I requested his personnel file from the FBI, his full file, and they sent it to me, and to my horror, I saw that he was indeed very much a high-ranking FBI official. He was a special agent in charge in Knoxville, New York, Albuquerque, New Haven, Philadelphia, Memphis, Dallas, and Los Angeles. Until he retired in 1979. He actually came into his position. He didn't have any background in criminology. In fact, he was a mediocre student in business administration at some school in Nebraska, and he got his job by virtue of writing a letter to the Bureau back in that time that just said, "Gentlemen, I am under the basic requirement of being 25 years of age, but most people consider me to be 26 or 27. If a person has the outward appearance of being 25 and can fulfill the many other requirements, why shouldn't he be considered for a position? If at all possible, I'd like to be considered as an applicant. Yours very truly, Ted L. Gunderson." And it worked. He had a job just before that selling hams, which for Hormel, which he never put down. He said, he reminisced about this in 1975 in an interview. He said, "Selling hams was all right, but I love this job," about the FBI. Later on in his career, he became very much a public advocate for the FBI while he was still in the FBI, and he did a lot of media appearances. And he spoke when there was backlash against the FBI during the civil rights movements and that type of thing. He spoke very much in favor of everything the FBI did. He said, when we had the counterintelligence effort called COINTELPRO going in the 50s and 60s, these methods helped break the backs of the people dropping bombs everywhere and wrecking millions of dollars worth of property. Extreme tactics were needed if we were going to stop them. If the FBI had not taken an aggressive approach in the early 60s when revolutionaries had taken over the college campuses, the loss of life and property would have been greater than it was. Amid the uproar against the FBI in regards to revelations of how they monitored Dr. Martin Luther King, including placing a bug in his hotel room to try to catch him doing dastardly deeds and blackmailing him, Gunderson explained that here too the FBI was in the right. And he said one of King's top advisors had been identified as a communist. And given Gunderson's history of placing people as Satanists thereafter, you wonder about the credibility of a lot of his FBI work. Responding to criticisms leveled against the Los Angeles FBI while under his personal command for its alleged harassment and unconcealed surveillance of a visiting Chinese scholar from UCLA, Gunderson told reporters, "You just have to take our word for it. If it's our investigation, it's a legitimate surveillance." It's really funny how he was advocating for police powers at the time he was in the FBI to come out and have this extreme paranoia against the FBI. It seemed like that paranoia was partially of his own making. You can see some of the paranoia in these media reports too, because he was also quoted saying that there's an element that wants to overthrow the government and has always been present, but the Vietnam War gave this element a cause. It added that he added that the element still exists today. In fact, it was an appearance he did, or a letter he wrote to one of the papers where he was publicly complaining about restrictions from the Attorney General's office against increased police powers of surveillance and preemptive activity on the behalf of the FBI, that the director at the time, Judge William H. Webster, asked Gunderson to cool down and that they could work within the Attorney General's guidelines. And Gunderson wrote this impassioned letter where he was saying, individual rights are of the utmost importance in a free society, but what are the rights of victims? Los Angeles at present is in a frustrating position, respectively request any suggestion. There's danger here, but our hands are tied. He was saying they really needed to be able to bug people, I guess, without warrants. They needed all kinds of increased latitude. Webster disagreed. He said, we can work within the guidelines set forward by the Attorney General, and there's no need to change that at this time. So like a week and a half later, Gunderson put in for his retirement. So it seemed that it was based on this reticence on behalf of Webster to increase the powers of the FBI or fight against the Attorney General for more police powers, that Gunderson decided to leave and go into private practice. And that was 79, and right away he goes into a high-profile case, the Jeffrey MacDonald murders at Fort Bragg. And I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that, but it was a very, very popular case at the time, still very contentious. This book, Fatal Vision, and film was based on it. But Jeffrey MacDonald was a medical doctor at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. And on February 17th, 1970, the police at the military base got an emergency call. They thought they were responding to a domestic disturbance. They came in. MacDonald's wife and 2 daughters were murdered. He had a stab wound and a concussion. He said he was attacked by a gang of hippies, 4 men, I think, and 1 woman who was supposedly holding a candle and chanting, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs." And a lot of his story just didn't add up. When they were looking at the evidence, the material evidence in the house, there weren't significant signs of struggle in the living room where he said this combat had taken place. In fact, they couldn't find any of his pajama fibers in there, but they found pajama fibers of his under one of his murdered daughter's fingernails. Pigs was written on one of the headboards, but apparently the finger used a glove, a medical glove, the type that Jeffrey MacDonald used in his practice and I think had in his home. And when they were looking at the story he was saying of this Manson-like cult, they felt it matched very closely to an article he had clearly read in Esquire magazine that was sitting in his home that it described the Manson murders. And in reconstructing the murders, they speculated that he had gotten in an argument with his wife and she had hit him on the head with a brush and giving him the concussion, and that afterwards, after he had murdered his whole family, he stabbed himself with a scalpel. There's still a lot of people who feel that he's innocent, and I think Errol Morris takes that position in his most recent book. The more I read about it, the more I don't know why people think he's innocent, but I don't feel like I've read enough to make a strong case one way or another. But what I do think is clear is that Gunderson coming on the case 10 years later after the murders in 1980 didn't help any. Didn't help anybody arrive at the truth. That is, there was a woman questioned shortly after the murders who was thought to perhaps fit the description of the woman who MacDonald had said was chanting "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs." A drug user who lived close to Fort Bragg by the name of Helena Stokely. Gunderson decided that she was a great prospect and that she must have been the killer, and he set about immediately trying to coerce a confession out of her. And in fact, he hired a Canadian psychic to go and tell her that she was in love with MacDonald and that they would, ultimately get married or some damn thing like that, and run off and have a happy life if she would just get him exonerated. And another ex-FBI agent who was working on the case accused Gunderson of coercing her with promises of books and movie deals and that type of thing. Still to this day, people are trying to get Jeffrey MacDonald out of prison. He wasn't convicted until 79 or 80, thrown into prison. But it's still a very popular case, and you can look up the details anywhere. There's endless articles about it. And that's Helena Stokely at around the time they brought her in for questioning at the time of the murders. Now, Gunderson felt like he had one piece of real ironclad evidence in the Helena Stokely case, and this was the fact, he claimed, that she had said in an interview that there was a hobby horse, or whatever, the horse the kids ride or whatever, and it had a broken spring within the home. And he said at the time she said this, that nobody else would have known it but the family. And he says this in a lecture in this clip, but you'll notice a distinct difference in what he's saying to Helena Stokely in an earlier interview.
So the first thing we did was try to contact Helena, because she had made these admissions but never had made any statements per se. And we talked to her on the telephone through her brother in January, would have been in January 1980, which is when I entered the case, right? And Helena was not cooperative, told us to drop dead in so many words. Her husband, Ernie Davis, also said, leave her alone. But in talking to her on the phone, I said, Helena, look, I have inside information that you were there. Now, to be honest with you, I didn't have that information, but it's a little trick that we play, right? But it works. I planted a seed. There's no question about it. It's a technique I've used for years. But she still would not cooperate. Another witness I developed was a woman in Dunkin' Donuts. Helena told us that she was a member of a satanic group. It was her initiation into the group that night. She was the one that was yelling, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs." She talked to us about when they entered the house, there was a German Shepherd that barked as they left but didn't bark when they entered. She told us about a rocking horse in the child's bedroom. The spring is broken. She couldn't ride it. She wouldn't have known that if she hadn't been in there that night. A big issue in the case is
fact that you said that the hobby horse was broken. The prosecution claims that you saw a picture in the newspaper several days after, and therefore you knew it from looking at the newspaper. But actually, the only people who knew that were the MacDonalds themselves. Did you see this picture in the newspaper?
I never knew anything about the hobby horse again until 1979.
No, you knew that night that the spring was
The
broken.
night of the murders, yes, but it was never mentioned again until 1979 at the trial in Raleigh.
Did you see the picture in the newspaper?
I never saw any pictures. You had to realize I was strung out on heroin, and that can be proven anywhere. Vanderbilt University, I instigated the methadone program there with Dr. Richard Treadway. It can all be proven that I was definitely on at least $200 a day of heroin.
But you did not ever see that picture.
How many junkies go around reading Newsweek and things like that?
So even though later on he was claiming there was no way she could have known, earlier on there's this confession here that there were pictures of the hobby horse already published, but she's saying she was too high to notice them. But it gets even worse. In 2007, CBS acquired photographs from the crime scene, and they found that none of the springs actually were broken. So there you go. Anyways, Stokely would go from confessing to recanting, and at one time she named 5 male co-conspirators, and none of them could be tied to the location. Some of them had solid alibis. One of them had a real ironclad alibi. He was in jail on the night of the murders. So her confession was rightly deemed absolutely worthless. There's another bit of clips from this interview I put together, because this is Gunderson interviewing Helena Stokely in 1982, and I think the clip kind of gives you an idea of just how scripted it seems to me her answers were, and it gives you kind of an idea of Ted Gunderson's tactic overall.
And then in October and December of 1980, you gave Mr. Beasley and me a statement wherein you advised that you were definitely there. Now, since then, last summer, as recently as last summer, the FBI contacted you and you said you don't recall being there. Can you tell us why you've changed your mind through these last 12 years so many times?
Yes, sir. Because at the time of the murders, I was involved with the Satanic cult. Since then, I've been contacted. I'm now pregnant. Anyone who knows anything about witchcraft knows the firstborn child can be sacrificed and will be.
You told Mr. Beasley and me also in 1980 that one of the high priorities in human sacrifice was a pregnant woman for this group. Is that true?
Yes, sir. The firstborn child is very eminent in any type of case like
When you
that.
say eminent, what do you mean?
It's considered, well, it's the top of the list.
To that, after the murders, and during the murders themselves, you were actually a member of this cult of 13 people.
Yes, sir.
Will you name the people who were also in that cult with
No,
you?
sir.
And why won't you do that?
I can't do it. So.
Did you personally believe in the philosophies of this cult?
No. At the time, and still at this time, I'm a practicing Roman Catholic. But I wanted to get involved in white witchcraft for benevolent purposes. Sir, I feel that Captain Jeffrey MacDonald should be freed once and for all, and not to have to go through all of what he's been going through for the last several years. I have not been coerced. I haven't been promised anything, except for the fact that I was promised relocation and change of name and all that kind of thing, which I don't want.
You're talking about promises from us. You have not been
Yes.
promised anything by us.
Right. No monetary promises, nothing like that.
In other words, what you're saying is,
It's basically just a conscience.
and we are going to attempt to talk to top federal and state officials in hopes of obtaining immunity for you with the understanding from you that you, in turn, will furnish us not only more details or other details that you may be withholding, but also the names of the people involved and the members of your cult and other information.
I've tried to come forward before, and every time I have, I've been made to look like some idiot, some incompetent fool that doesn't know what's going on, that was so high on drugs. It's been proven otherwise, because I have been under hypnosis. When I went under hypnosis, the doctor that administered the hypnosis said that I had a mental block at 1:30, and he said that he felt that was self-blocking.
Deliberately, in other words.
Yes, because I knew what was going on. I used LSD a lot. At the time, acid was the name for LSD. I chanted, acid is groovy, kill the pigs, hit him again, or something like that. I said, acid is groovy, kill the pigs, hit him again.
The most interesting part about that to me was that she said that they were using hypnosis, and it sounds like they were using hypnosis to recover memories. I don't know what she means when she said that the hypnotist found that there was a block at 1:30, and I don't know what 1:30 means. Maybe the time of night. I know the call came in sometime in the early AM that the murders had taken place. But of course, Ted Gunderson from this case would work very much with people who claim to be survivors of ritual abuse who were recovering their memories thereafter. He also, sometime just after the MacDonald case, claims that he came across the conspiracist Bible that he would work with thereafter and sell at many of his conferences. It was called Pawns in the Game by a Canadian author named William Guy Carr. And it's has a very anti-Semitic slant to it. It uses the protocols of the Elders of Zion to build this story about the Illuminati conspiracy that seeks to take over the world, really kind of outlining the same points from the discredited protocols of the Elders of Zion. And even though Ted Gunderson would speak a lot about the police state coming up and comparing it to Nazi Germany, he didn't seem to be entirely turned off by Nazism, to the point that in 2006 he went to a Free Press Barnes Review conference, which is a very far-right Holocaust denialist kind of group, to give a lecture. And also at that event they were throwing some kind of party for a former SS officer who was there. Must have been very old at the time, but the pamphlet that wrote this up that I had found later on was gushing that about the courageous opening of the museum, quote, dedicated to the memory of Adolf Hitler. It was indeed one of the highlights of the conference, meeting this courageous patriot, meaning the SS officer, who continues to fight the good fight well into his 80s. God bless you, Herr Juncker. So that was something Ted Gunderson was at. And I feel, kind of tangentially, that when you get a guy like Ted Gunderson and you get people like Alex Jones and you get people going down this rabbit hole of conspiracy theory, the anti-Semitism, if it's not pre-existing, is going to come later on. I attended many conferences for conspiracy theorists, whether it's in the UFO fringe or the ritual abuse fringe. And I guess somebody of my hair and general makeup doesn't cast suspicions in that regard. And I was seeing that I could whittle it down to one word to get the words flowing. I could just lean in and say, Jews, and people would let fly with theories about world banking and other types of corrupt Zionist takeover. And I feel that makes sense in the conspiracy fringe if they're looking at the history of their beliefs, and they look backwards to about the time of the French Revolution, where some of these Illuminati conspiracy theories came into prominence, almost fully coherent as we see them now, and those kinds of suspicions of a Jewish threat that were prevalent. As for the hypnosis being used to secure evidence of blocked memories, 1980, this book, Michelle Remembers, came out, which coincided nicely with Ted Gunderson going into his private practice and searching for Satanists. But Michelle Remembers, discredited, of course, now, even on the mundane details, journalists looked into the background that was presented in this story and found none of it really true. And it's amazing that anybody had to do this, because it's a supernatural horror story as it is. But it became a bestseller, and she was taken as a credible witness on talk shows and that type of thing, where they were telling this story of this woman who went under hypnosis by her therapist, Lawrence Pastor, a Catholic, a psychiatrist also in Canada, who began revealing these stories of satanic ritual abuse, and not just satanic ritual abuse in the real world, but she was supposedly visited by otherworldly beings, including the Archangel Michael and Jesus Christ and Satan himself. And Jesus, I guess, comes and removes her physical scars from her, taking away some of the corroborating evidence for her story, conveniently. But it's bizarre to see that these types of things would be treated in the news, and this is where the media was really complicit. They would talk about the threat of satanic ritual abuse, and when presented with stories like this, they would often fail to mention the supernatural aspects and pretend that these things exist in the real world. And you'd see Geraldo talking about those things, saying, well, whether you believe in Satan or not, whether you believe in these kind of supernatural premises, there are people who do, and these are the things that they do. And these are what we've learned from people who've recovered their memories, the same as people who've recovered their memories of alien abduction, past life regression. And I found that there's actually a significant scene for future life progression. Look it up online. I'm sure you can find a therapist for it to this day. And I'm sure you can go to conferences for any one of these things and get continuing education units as well. Ted Gunderson began traveling around with alleged victims of mind control, most of whom had recovered their memories in one way or another. And one of the most significant of those that he was traveling around with was Brice Taylor. And she had a rather absurd series of claims about her position within the government as a mind-controlled sex slave. And you can see, again, the kind of media complicity where, as outrageous as this story might seem, the story that Brice Taylor was actually telling was far more outrageous than this. And I think there's this false sense of balance that the journalists think they need to strike, where they need to try to give this, they feel like they need to try to give the story its best chance possible to make it seem credible. But when that means denying certain things people are saying, I feel like it's simply irresponsible.
Now to a spy thriller unfolding in the heart of suburban Los Angeles. The CIA allegedly brainwashes a woman and turns her into a sex slave to the rich and famous.
It does sound bizarre. Jody Baskerville is here there with this Unit 13 exclusive investigation.
Brice Taylor used to be your typical soccer mom, with a successful husband, 3 kids, and a beautiful home in the San Fernando Valley. That is, until she started telling of a secret double life as a mind-controlled sex slave for the CIA.
I would have sex with him and deliver whatever messages that I was programmed to deliver.
Now, this one-time suburban housewife finds herself the unlikely leading lady in a real-life psychosexual spy thriller, co-starring a former Los Angeles FBI chief.
Brice Taylor is absolutely telling the truth. I would stake my name and reputation of 50 years on it.
If Brice Taylor's story sounds more like a movie than reality, well, maybe that's because it's awful close to the plot of Long Kiss Goodnight. Just like Gina Davis, Brice is knocked unconscious in a near-fatal car accident that jolts loose suppressed memories of another life as a CIA operative, seducing the rich, the famous, and the powerful from Washington to Hollywood.
I happen to have 2,200 plus pages of documentation of the mind control program.
Brice alleges that she and her entire family were among the victims of that program.
Drugs, hypnosis, electroshock, torture,
And Brice says it turned her into a mindless Stepford wife. A programmed sex toy who could be triggered into action by the CIA with subliminal messages embedded in her brain.
I was a human robot. I had no idea because I was programmed to consciously only know that I was, doing my motherly housewife duties.
Whether it's true or not, Brice's story has had a tragic effect on her once happy family. She and her husband are now divorced, and her 2 grown sons have virtually disowned her.
Well, my ex-husband and my sons think that I'm absolutely crazy.
Kelly was the only one who believed her mother's story and suffered a complete nervous breakdown over it.
Kelly actually made 2 suicide attempts.
And now at age 22, Kelly is in a catatonic state in a California mental hospital after being committed by a judge just last year. However, Dr. Hartman suspects Brice is not a victim of CIA mind control, but of a strange condition known as false memory syndrome, in which delusions are unwittingly reinforced and sometimes even implanted by psychotherapists themselves.
Many of the cases in recent years that have caused problems have been the result of psychotherapists. They didn't really understand the power of the techniques and the way techniques can make things go wrong.
We contacted 3 Los Angeles psychotherapists who treated Brice, but all of them refused to discuss her case even with her permission. Pam Monday believes that's because they've already been threatened by the CIA.
There is no such thing as false memory syndrome. There's nothing in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that says there is such a thing.
In fact, Dr. Monday claims the condition was actually concocted by the CIA to cover up its mind control experiments. Brice Taylor wrote about her alleged life as a CIA sex slave in vivid detail in a new book out called Thanks for the Memory.
See, there was reference to this idea of false memory syndrome. It wasn't explained very well by the psychologist acting as the counterpoint. And then you see this asshole Pamela Monday talking about, well, there's no such thing, therefore Brice Taylor's claims are entirely true. The idea is that when you're going through hypnosis and the therapist is asking you to recall memories of abuse or things like that because they're sure that they're repressed and they're there, people begin to kind of fantasize these things. They go through this hypnotic regression and they believe they're retrieving memories, and they begin cultivating those memories, and they become deeply held beliefs, and they very much react like real memories in people's minds. And this was studied at Harvard, where they were looking at people who claimed to be abducted by aliens, and they retrieved their memories of alien abduction through that similar type of hypnosis. And they did a test where they were measuring their response, their trauma response to these script-driven narratives about alien abduction. And they were seeing that the trauma that these people were suffering related to these memories of being abducted by aliens acted like real trauma. So when you weigh this on somebody, when you give them this kind of narrative and you cultivate that is very much a real type of abuse, and you're really crippling that person thereafter. And you can see that in the Brice Taylor story. In some of what she talks about how much therapy she went through, how much time she spent trying to recover her memories, and how this crippled her and made her almost invalid at certain points in her life. And you also see her daughter, Kelly, catatonic in a mental hospital as an inpatient. So the news report references Brice Taylor's book, Thanks for the Memories, which should indicate that they should have had some idea of what's in the book. And I think reading the book itself would kind of show it's so over the top, it's not even worthy of being discredited by investigation. One of my favorite segments talks about the dolphin porn that she was filmed in, directed by Sylvester Stallone. And she said, another auxiliary project, one that brought in proceeds, was dolphin pornography. Dolphin porn was filmed in Malibu, and there are the dolphin tanks at Point Mugu. It was convenient because they had cages already built, and so the dolphins could be housed there for use almost any time. Ronald Reagan really loved the dolphin stuff. He watched a porn video of my daughter Kelly and I with a couple dolphins. During the viewing, he smiled, patted my leg, and said, "I'll be with you later." He wasn't into sex with children, didn't have sex with my daughter. When the film was over, he said, "Watching you do it underwater ballet is beautiful, but seeing you with the dolphin is out of this world." He laughed and looked up like he was seeing a missile or shuttle launch. lots of dolphin porn was filmed. I believe Bob Hope gave copies of it to Prince Charles, Prince Philip, and Margaret Thatcher, who is a lesbian. Now, here were some other Brice Taylor claims, and I'll have you know, you can find her full book of Things from the Memories online. And these aren't outlier claims. These aren't things I had highlighted from reading the whole book. This was just me perusing through and finding wild shit she said and throwing it in because I thought you would appreciate it. She has a little segment there about Barbra Streisand. Barbra Streisand is a mind-controlled robot whom Brice would have sex with one-on-one in order to deliver a message to her and keep her programming going or to instruct her on what to say at certain times. Because I guess there's no way to tell somebody something without having sex with them. I don't know. The Queen of England used Brice for genetic engineering, breeding her with Ronald Reagan, producing a child for breeding within the royal family. John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Henry Kissinger, Nelson Rockefeller, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, George Bush, Bob Hope, Elvis, almost every notable has had a crack at Brice Taylor at one point or another. Henry Kissinger used her as his personal secretary / human computer for 19 years because of her photographic memory and the computer skills they kind of installed into her brain, though nobody can corroborate her having ever been with Henry Kissinger at any time. Jesus personally appeared to her and said, "Get up off your knees and leave. You, my child, are innocent. You have done nothing wrong." The Illuminati ruled over Elvis and would send Brice to service him and instruct him on what to say or do during his next performance. The idea that Elvis was hard up for a piece of ass after his shows, I don't get that. Quote, "When my mother left my father to babysit me, he withheld all food from me until I was starving. Then he held my bottle in front of me, but instead of allowing me to have the bottle, he'd slip his penis into my mouth for me to suck." And this was supposed to, now, that's not funny, but the idea that this was supposed to enforce mind control on an infant that's still suckling on a nipple is insane. The idea that this would be traumatic to somebody at that age who has no context for it whatsoever, and that this would serve to traumatize somebody and reinforce multiple personality disorder, which is the claim, makes no sense from a cognitive perspective. She says, "I started menstruating at 10. This heralded abuse and rituals which involved being raped and impregnated sometimes twice a year." Now, this doesn't really make sense from a medical perspective that none of this could be corroborated also. I mean, it seems ridiculous I'm talking about corroborating her story at all, but if you look her up, Google her up when you go home, most of what you'll see are people saying, well, you have to check out this woman's amazing story about what's really going on behind the scenes in the government. There's a great piece on dangerousminds.net, which is associated with disinformation.com, which has published many books, and they were putting out a series back in around 2000, I think it was, for Discovery Channel, and they had a pilot season that you can get on DVD and can probably download somewhere. It was hosted by a guy named Richard Metzger, who wrote a piece about a piece they did about Brice Taylor and Ted Gunderson, where he was reminiscing. And it was interesting because I hadn't brought it up when I previously wrote about Gunderson, but people were telling me that when Gunderson was going around with these mind-controlled sex slaves, he himself was clearly trying to bang them himself. And this was kind of hearsay, but Richard Metzger in his piece, which is pretty funny, says, "It was obvious, and I mean obvious, that Ted thought he was going to get laid." And this was when he had gotten both Ted Gunderson and Brice together for the piece. "He followed Brice around like a male dog sniffing around a female dog's ass. When I wanted them both on camera at the same time, she balked and took me aside to admonish me not to make it look like we're a couple. She wasn't into him, but she wanted him there on camera to make her seem more credible or something." And he went on to say, "Over the years, when I've been invited to screen the disinformation TV shows at museums and repertory cinemas, the most ridiculous question anyone has ever asked me about this piece, and it gets asked nearly every time, is how much of what she says do you think is true? How about none of it?" And that's another bizarre thing in the conspiracy fringe. It seems the more idiotic evidence they can pile on, the more people tend to think, well, there must be a shred of truth in this somewhere. Where there's smoke, there's fire. But I think oftentimes there really isn't anything at all. Here's a great kind of clip that came from Geraldo, where Ted Gunderson was talking and says the most ludicrous thing about why he never comes forward with his sources and never bothers to make an arrest against this conspiracy that he claims to have had such personal interactions with.
Respected law enforcement professional, recently or retired now from the FBI, former regional director of Los Angeles. Do you, sir, believe that these dreadful allegations of babies being sacrificed are true?
I absolutely believe it, without any doubt. Based on the information that's been given to me across the country by numerous survivors and by confidential sources and informants.
Then why don't you name these people and arrest them? Never a name, never an arrest. These women come out of a group and they insist that they know the people in the group, and yet they do not identify these large mysterious cults. Name them and arrest them and get them off the street.
Does he not make a valid point?
He makes a valid point. The problem with that is, number one, police officers don't believe it. I may believe it. You may believe it. Some people in your audience may believe it. They don't believe it. Number two, if you decide to investigate these people, you have to, number one, handle it from an undercover operation. If you put an undercover operation into effect, then you have, in a sense, your own police officers become involved in these heinous crimes, and they are, of course, become murderers. And in addition to that, if you do decide to investigate these people, there's a lot of work. And many law enforcement officers are apathetic and don't want to get involved.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard this. The debate here could rage over this issue alone for hours and hours and hours. Michael Aquino is right when he says there have not been any successful prosecutions for this horrible allegation. Ted Gunderson is a sincere man with a good reputation who says that there are difficulties in the prosecution. Still, the point is it has never been proven in a court of law. Obviously, it needs more investigation, but if these things are happening, then there should be a national task force of federal and state and local cops working together to prove or disprove. Because this is just unacceptable, this impasse. Coming up, we're going to have warning signs you should watch for, parents, and all of our guests will be available for a final discussion about Satanism after this break.
But I just love the ludicrous answer that they can't name them and arrest them because undercover officers are themselves becoming murderers and just acting as recruits for the satanic movement. At what point do you pull the cover off of the undercover operation when you're running around apparently ritually sacrificing babies and all the rest? He started sending bizarre letters to characters like John McCain and Ronald Reagan, and those letters ended up being forwarded to the Attorney General. And honestly, in looking through the FBI file, I'm surprised at how much follow-up they did. At one time, Ted Gunderson was claiming he had received some kind of poison in the mail, and they actually went the extra mile, even knowing who he was and how many claims he had made of people trying to kill him and the Illuminati out to get him. They ran full analysis and everything else. John McCain actually sent this to the Attorney General. They researched the claims Gunderson was making and came back and said, you know, we're actually only getting generalities here. And despite this man's claims that he has this kind of ironclad evidence, he never coughs it up at all. But intermittently, Gunderson would try to hand these things into authority, apparently not realizing what actual evidence is, which is also, you know, bizarre considering his full employment in the FBI. And it was a fairly spotless record he had in the FBI. There were a few reprimands, but nothing major. But he would often send these gushing, pathetically groveling letters to whoever was the director at the time. And he loved J. Edgar Hoover. And to his dying day, he seemed to never say a bad word about Hoover and was very adamant that Hoover was not a homosexual. Because I think Ted Gunderson firmly believed that the homosexual agenda was also part of the satanic movement. He would file these lawsuits as well. He was suing, saying his phone is tapped. He's always filing these affidavits, making these claims about gang stalking, the Illuminati, or whatever else. And you can still find these things online, and usually you'll find these online posted by people who feel that that documentation in and of itself proves these things. And that's kind of common in the conspiracist fringe. Once you bring something to the courts, once you file affidavits, you've made it real somehow.